with the wet and wet techniques, generally it's paint applied to shiny wet surface, so you need 2 containers of water again. So you're just going to put clean water in, and then that'll allow the paint to flow freely. So I just take clean water, paint it into that first section, good amount of water, and then I'm going to grab some color, a good amount with a good amount of water, and you can see how it just starts to kind of feather out. Take a little bit more water. In any of those areas where there was water, you can see that really soft flow as the water comes out. Clean my brush. Next technique, flat and round stroke brush over the wet surface. So I need to really clean my brush out. I'm going to go back to my clean water. Fill it up in the area with water. And I'll start with some of the colors. So mix up this dark green here. And just paint it in. You can see it gets that really soft flow along the edges. Take the flat end of the brush, really open it up a little bit. Good amount of paint on there. You can see you got that nice soft flow coming out. Try some of the thin brush. Really get a lot of things happening there where the wet on wet is. Alright, spontaneous mixture of varied hues applied to a wet surface. So I'm going to put a clean wash down. But I got to get my brush clean again because, again, everything is on a wet surface. So if I need to wet the entire surface of my space, I'll come in with a bright wash now. Got a good amount of paint on there. You can see it's really starting to blend around. And the water that I put on there is really pulling, allowing that to go around. Clean my brush again. Come in with a dark color. I'll use the complement. Really put in a heavy wash of color. Now another added thing that I want to do with this is I'm going to use the salt technique, where I have that heavy wash of the violet. I take a pinch of salt. I'm just going to sprinkle some salt and let it totally and completely dry. I've got a mixture of a couple different salts in here. I've got some thick sea salt and I've got some regular table salt. I'm going to let that dry, and what happens is it creates, as it dries, you rub the salt off, it creates a really interesting crystalline effect where it looks almost like frost. All right. So a directional flow from a tilted paper. Again, you got a heavy wash of a color in there, but again, I've got to put clean water down first. I go into my clean water. And then I'm going to pick up some of my good amount of paint here on the brush. Now I'm going to tilt the paper so that it runs with the water off the page. You can see, whoa, that one ran pretty well. there where the paper, where the water is stopped, it's kind of pooling. Move it around a little bit. Woo! Right off the page there. That's kind of fun. Next step, pigment-filled round brush touched to a wet surface. That's right here. I'll move that over a little bit. Clean out my brush. Get my round brush again. Make sure that's clean. Some clean water. I'll take my round brush. Just mixing up a dark violet here. And just dab it. Obviously, where there's more water, it spreads out a little bit. I can roll the brush, push it, and you can see how it kind of pushes the water around, kind of pulls into one another. And when that dries, it creates a really interesting overall effect. Clean wash here, edge of wet on wet. And this one says sprayed with a spray mister. Paint in my color here. Get a little more pigment in there. Just kind of apply that in with a heavy wash. Now I'll take my spray mister. You see it makes that really interesting pull where the spray mister hit it and it just kind of blends down. Next one, puddling. Additional liquid is applied. So I got to clean my brush again. Each time you want to do that, make sure you keep going back for some clean water. Put some clean water in here. So if I put in a thick amount of paint, it's puddling down there. So get a little more paint on there. We're starting to puddle. Now I'm going to clean my brush again and just come in with a dab of water. You can see it kind of splits it. Creates some interesting effects happening in there as you go through that one. The puddling is going to let it move around. Again, it's picking up anywhere that there's water and it's kind of moving around, just creating some really soft effects. So that's why this whole thing is going to be wet and wet, create a lot of softness in your work. The last one is a water-filled round brush touched with a wet varied wash. So the wet varied wash means I'm just putting in a few different color washes again, wetting the entire surface of the circle. And personally I like working light to dark, so I'm going to be most of the time using a light to dark technique. I'm kind of just putting in some thick areas of green or some yellow. I'm going to come in and put in some green, again kind of thick. Mix up a little bit of a brown with that. A little more water. Just kind of putting that in. I get my round brush, fill it with water. So you could use that round brush to kind of pull that color around. Lift up some of the color from there and put it down over here. It's that real overly soft movement, almost like a tie-dye, or somewhat textural if you're trying to create surfaces, ground surfaces, sky surfaces, whatever. And you end up with a pretty good overall soft wet in wet technique. It's one of the more prominent techniques that artists would use when using watercolor, and you end up with what you see there.